So I've been working on another video lately, trying to get that out as soon as I can, and all of a sudden the 40k community exploded in just vitriolic hatred against one another. I have not seen this much fighting since, I guess, Jagatai Khan coming back to the bridge of his ship. And what exactly is all of this over for? Well, long story short, the new custodes codex for 10th edition dropped, or something was leaked, and short story basically revealed that female custodes are now a thing. And people have lost their shit over this. Twitter alone has just gone to hell. As if it wasn't hell already. Like, it's gone more to hell, if that is possible. I've seen people, like, saying, like, hey, we were trying to boycott this, or I'm leaving 40k. I've been seeing, like, other people just start demanding more representation out of the blue because they're just those kind of people. I've seen, like, people, like, sending, like, some of the worst threats. Like, this is fucked up. But I've also seen other people just, like, calling out, quote, women, like, against this. Even, it's so, oh my god. What I think this makes it worse, however, is how, like, the outside community from Warhammer is now kind of jumping in on this, where if, like, if you go to YouTube, you see, like, a whole lot of, like, clickbait outrage and just kind of grifting memes on this. And then other people, I've seen, like, a few quote, like, one or two posts saying, like, oh, they don't play Warhammer, but they're still outraged that there isn't representation, as if they, you know, don't do their fucking research and know about, like, Sisters of Battle or some shit. I've seen people rant on about, like, Amazon was trying to push this because Henry Cavill in the new show. I've seen stuff like shareholders like BlackRock, and then, like, the concept of ESG investing. It's just, there is so much going on. I've never seen the community just tear itself apart like this before, that I figured I should make a very quick, like, fairly unedited video just to kind of get my thoughts on this. And beforehand, I've been looking at people like Bricky, Jay from Eons of Battle, Discourse Minis, Major Kill, I think, is also one I previously watched. I read, like, some open letter to Games Workshop on this whole matter. I've listened to, like, What the 40K. I've listened to, like, some skits kind of making fun of this whole thing. I've been trying to get as many perspectives as I think I can on this, and I think I can start narrowing it down on some of the talking points that I really want to discuss. So I think one of the big things to just kind of bring up is why female custodes in the first place, and mostly that comes down to one of the authors, Aaron Dembski-Bowden, who I think in a past Reddit post said, like, he'd always wanted to, like, write about female custodes, but higher-ups wouldn't let him. So whether or not those people have kind of, like, changed their minds, they've been kind of removed, new people have moved in, basically that's been given the green light, and I think Aaron finally wrote about it. Moreover, I think there was also, like, a hint in the books, or at least a very recent book, of course, by Aaron, like, I think it was, like, the last just a couple of years now, and it's like there's a very vague passage saying, like, oh, the golden warriors of men and women, but it's very vague and ambiguous, which even kind of goes against, of, like, if this was Aaron's chance to write about it, it's not that good, because this could be female custodes, or this could mean the Sisters of Silence. I also am kind of finding it a little weird that it's only, like, Aaron's quote that's kind of being thrown around a lot, and, like, not, say, like, Chris Wright or Rod, or whatever his last name is. Like, he's written a lot of custodes books, or just kind of getting more opinions from, like, other authors, and, like, what are their opinions and thoughts on this beforehand. It's like, it's very weird that's only ever focusing on Aaron, like, he's the sole writer of custodes, but that's not the case. 40k has multiple authors across multiple stories and whatnot. So it's just very weird to only ever hear about Aaron's take and not, like, anyone else, I guess. A very common argument I have heard is that, you know, retcons are just very common in 40k, which, yeah, I will say, like, when you stop and look back at 40k's history, there are plenty of retcons that you can kind of just go down a list for. My argument for this, however, is a lot of these retcons happened very early on in, like, maybe, like, you know, first, second edition. That's the, like, to my understanding on how this is going. But on top of that, like, a lot of the other retcons that happen have been very, very big and actually feel like they make an impact. Like, they really make an impact. Like, I remember Necrons. Necrons I have kind of delved into and realized like they have changed a lot from like just soulless, mindless, literal just Terminator movie robots in space to something that's a bit more refined and is basically like 40K's version of Tomb Kings. Some people absolutely hated this change. They wanted like the old version, and yeah, that's understandable, but at the same time, what we got now and have moved forward with, I ultimately think is better because it actually gives more character to the faction. We now have, just more interesting people to like read and learn about, like the Silent King, or better yet, Trazen. Another retcon I think people are going to bring up are like, what about the Votann? How did they just suddenly pop into existence? And yeah, I will say like that's definitely a weird one to explain, but to be fair, squats technically did exist in very early 40K and were retconned out. So when the leaks were coming back, it's effectively a retcon of a retcon. Plus, they were the first new army ever being added to 40K since Custodes all the way back in 2017, like for 6 years. So I think with that, like months of build up to kind of help build up hype, understand the lore, understand like what's going on, people kind of just got accepting of like they were coming, this is what's happening, and it was a very big event. The Rogodorn I've also heard is kind of like something that's just kind of been popped in. It's just, oh, now it exists in like the books, and like as far as I have looked, it's never been mentioned. Like it's always existed. I always just kind of assumed that it was just kind of a lore development thing where someone found like an STC and now the Guard just have a new tank. So meanwhile here, from what you're getting in the book, is a very small short story that Games Workshop didn't really mention. It's not, as far as I am understanding it, at least currently right now, nothing else is really mentioning female custodes elsewhere in the Codex. I could be wrong on that, to be perfectly fair. I don't actually own the Codex, but it doesn't really feel like that bombastic or something that they were trying to push forward. It feels like they were almost trying to hide it, and like what some people would say is like maybe slowly testing the waters, see if people notice, see if they accept it, or to others might see as like trying to boil a frog. In either case, we've seen the results of that. There's also the factor that even though lore changes a lot of people do like to stop and invest in the lore. Like, people like to read good stories. So for something to constantly change all the time, and knowing like something like a small little detail that you like and know can just change in like the next book in a couple of years or so, and nothing is permanent, it kind of gives some people not that much reason to like maybe get invested in the lore in the first place, or will be a lot more upset when it does eventually change, like I said, with the Necrons. I think a lot of people are also kind of missing this from a hobby point of view, in that nothing was ever really stopping you from just kit patching female custodes to begin with. Like, ultimately, Warhammer is still a hobby, and you are more than welcome to, paint or even customize your models however you want. Jay from Eon's Battle has already made like female Space Marines, and he's done them well, and while that might not be officially canon, it is still fun to see. There's still tons like fun of like fan art that you can stop and look around and be like, yeah, this is part of the actual hobby. Being creative and just kind of creating your own shit. Like, Warhammer does still kind of allow that. Like, the two missing Primarchs, I think, were kind of the reason for like allowing players to like make their own Space Marine chapter. In 9th edition, there were even like rules to like create more Space Marine chapters or own custom craft worlds, tomb worlds, hive fleets, etc. So just because it's not written as canon in the official lore doesn't stop you from just making it yourself. There is still the hobby aspect that you can derive and just have your own fun with. I have always known the Custodes as like the Space Marines of Space Marines. They go through a very similar process of creation, and if by that, in terms of Space Marine creation, like now, female creation is almost impossible because they always die, then how would there be female Custodes in the first place? If by extension they are very similar to Space Marines in creation, just how does that work? Better yet, another fact that people kind of bring up too is that even if they do exist, if they're going through all this massive, transhuman physiology, and like they're not really being like the typical human, like they're roided out when you really stop and think about it. So they're not really looking like everything that you keep seeing in the fan art. They're looking literally just like they do now. Or at best, maybe look something like this. And even then, it's not really that distinguishable to like what people would probably want to recognize or would really like to recognize as like a female custodes. So like it kind of has to raise another question, like what would even be the point? Because again, like a good chunk of this was like Aaron couldn't write about female custodes because they weren't selling models. They now try to include this in, but they don't really include any female models. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense here at all. I think just another small tidbit of that is, at least this is much more of a personal level, and something that actually what the 40K also brought up, which I do appreciate, is the combination of the Sisters of Silence. It's just the small interactions between the custodes and this sisterhood is you just have very strong elite warriors paired with essentially an anti-psyker unit that both, of course, have their own strength and watch each other's backs fill in the weakness. They're a tag team. But then there's also then the nice niche, when you think about it, of an all-men group plus an all-female group working together. Almost like the differences of men and the differences of women coming together to work as one. That's like a small, nice little message that I think people are missing. And so when you kind of take the concept of custodes can also be women, well, that kind of starts shattering that point and kind of muddies the message a bit. And then I guess like the other immediate action is like, okay, we'll add men to this sisters, but again, guess what? That just kind of starts muddying that up now, and you then just kind of get less unique of a faction like every other faction when you stop and think about it, which, mind you, there's also more diversity within those other factions. The Imperial Guard, recently had their model refresh, so now you have more like female options. You have the Eldar and the Drukhari, you got some models with the Tau, you got Gene Stealer cults, you got the Votan, Necrons, and then compare that in contrast with like just the almost sole gender sex regiments of the Sisters of Battle or the Space Marines. You actually do have a wide variety of representation already in Warhammer, but you've never had a group where it's then like an all-male group and an all-female group coming together and working together. It's not the same as, say, Imperial Guard, where all the men and women are just shoved into like a single unit of, say, shock troops, and they all just act effectively the same. It's not the same detail there if you just suddenly start pushing female custodes. But I think the biggest issue out of all this, and probably what a lot of people are ultimately getting upset over, is just how Games Workshop just delivered it in this one tweet, where they just said they have always been there, which is a blatant lie. If you look at like even the earliest of Rogue Trader, again, they were listed as men. I think Valdor constantly refers to the custodes as brothers. I've seen people like reference that. It gives off the same energy as just like somehow Palpatine returned. It comes off as a bit just condescending and a bit insulting to the intelligence if you just do some basic research. Everyone knows that this is a retcon, and at the end of the day, if you did really want to push female custodes, there were much better ways that you could do it. Like, I don't know, advancing the lore, saying the custodes really need to replenish their losses, better Vox Call to, like, get shit done because, Call's kind of their handyman for anything trying to push stuff forward. But ultimately, they didn't, and they just fully dropped the ball. And now everyone's yelling at each other and trying to argue and just basically dragging the whole of 40K into just, like, a political war. Like everything else that I see nowadays on just social media, just other media and just games and TV, and it's just tiring. It just, on a personal level, I just don't see female custodes being a thing. I just personally like the like male and female dynamic between the custodes and the sisterhood. I think that's a good message. I think that could have been expanded upon. The Sisters of Silence alone could have been expanded by adding, like, I think their Terminator armor or their, like, cyber dogs as models. Like, they desperately need more support than just their one kit to build 3 different units that's just different weapon options. And I think focusing now, or trying to focus on female custodes, I think is just going to keep pushing them into the back. If this was done for a diversity thing, I think that's stupid because there's already so much other diversity in 40k alone. And I constantly just never understand why people need to exactly see themselves every single time when they see a faction, instead of just kind of appreciating certain aspects and kind of like graft, or just try to see themselves in like different shoes when they're not exactly represented. I don't get it. I understand Bricky's statement now of just like he's just a little embarrassed to be a part of this community, because with just how everyone is acting, like I really don't want to be associated with this community right now either. It's just, I know one of my friends is absolutely getting a kick out of this. Like he's just kind of a bit of a troll in a way, but I'm just looking at this, I'm just like, I'm sad. I'm depressed. I'm trying to get off 10-hour work shifts and just trying to enjoy some memes. I don't need to see people like constantly argue or bicker with one another. Long story short, you know, if you want female custodes, like at the end of the day, kit bash them. Like that's the best you can probably do. Official lore is just going to be weird, and just try to be as open and accepting to as you can be. Just, I don't believe Warhammer is for everyone, like how they want to state, but I do believe anyone is more than welcome to join, and just try to find something to enjoy this hobby with. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the whole matter. GW really dropped the ball. I don't think female custodes really should be a thing. This whole argument is just blown way out of proportion. Just try to get along with people, and for the love of God, stay off Twitter.